Court will come to order. All rise.
Please be seated. For the record, both assistant state attorneys are present, three defense counsel and Mr. Rodgers. Is he on his way? Okay. Do you know when the state rested their close? What time?
14:20.
Thank you. Oh, okay, we're ready. All four defense counsel are present. Bring them out. You snuck in on me. Please be seated. I will ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions, not talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Defense.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have a fancy multimedia presentation to give you, so I'm going to have to rely on reason and logic. And I'm going to ask you to come with me and we can follow the state's case. I want to take it piece by piece so everybody can see exactly what happened here. I think once we do that, we'll see how the state veered so far away from the actual events that occurred in this case. Because what we're dealing with now are really the musings and the ramblings of a couple of people who are receiving compensation to testify for the state, for the Lee County Sheriff's Office. And we've gone far afield of what actually happened. What actually happened is fairly obvious, but the state has turned this into a very convoluted story of conspiracy. Let's take it from the beginning. The state's theory, Curtis Wainwright and Taylor Schomacher's theory, is that Mark Sievers was concerned that his marriage to Dr. Sievers was falling apart. They had tried to work things out, gone to counseling, all the things people do when they're having trouble in their marriage. She was having an affair, according to Mr. Wright. And Mr. Sievers found that affair to be so serious that he was concerned she would leave him and take his children away from him. Now, Mark Sievers, as we've heard, had a very close relationship with his children, and he was concerned about that. Now, the state never produced this lover of Dr. Sievers. He didn't come in here to testify and say, yeah, that was the case. We were having an affair. There's nothing to support that. We don't know that that's true. According to Curtis Wainwright, Mark then expresses concern for the safety of his children, that if Dr. Sievers were to divorce him, somehow that would make his children unsafe. So, after counseling, thinking, talking to friends, Mark Sievers decides, my only option is to kill my wife. So, on a hot dog run at Curtis Wainwright's wedding, Mark tells Curtis that he needs to have Teresa killed. And at that wedding, and you'll remember these rather creepy photos of Mark and Curtis Wright. Look exactly alike. They don't look just like brothers, they look like twins. During this wedding, they have this meeting. And they decide, Curtis at that time tells him, no, more counseling, try more counseling. You could do, because Curtis Wright, as you saw, was here. He's a very reasoned and deliberative person. He's soft-spoken. He's actually probably the nicest convicted murderer you've ever met. You sat and watched him. And he tried to counsel his friend, no, don't do it, Mark. Don't kill your wife. But Mark was determined that he was going to do this. He needs to kill his wife to protect the children as Mark's friend. Mark was his best man. He does what buddies do. You help him out. You go and kill his wife. You get involved in a plan to do that. Now, Curtis Wright is a 5-time convicted felon. But he told you he couldn't possibly do this killing himself. Sure, he could arrange it. I mean, he could do that. He's a businessman. He can handle that. But actually killing somebody, that was a little too much for him. So he decided he's going to subcontract that to Mr. Rodgers. And there's a whole thing that goes on here with these burner phones and their coded messages and all this stuff. Those burner phones, track phones, whatever they were, paid phones. Curtis Wright told you that it was his belief that Dr. Sievers and Mark Sievers were in an open marriage. And I would submit to you that it's probably likely that track phones are used for infidelity far more frequently than they are used for contract killings. The burner phone, I'll get into that a little bit more with all this electronics later. So before this plan is supposed to go into effect, Curtis Wright, his wife, Angie, she gets into a car accident with their family car. And rather than postponing this killing, he's going to travel to another state and kill somebody. Now, he really has to get this done. He's on a timeline, has to accomplish this. Rather than driving his own car, he rents a car in his name. The state showed you the receipt for that. His name is on there. Curtis Wayne Wright, with the miles that were traveled with the car. He doesn't postpone that plan. He doesn't say, well, I don't have access to a car. He doesn't go steal a car, which I guess would have been a viable option. He is a 5-time convicted felon. He's no stranger to crime. No, he doesn't do that. He just presses forward. He goes and rents a car in his name and travels down to Florida. He told you the reason he didn't fly to Florida was because he would have to produce a driver's license, and that could throw the whole plan out of whack. He rents a car in his name and produced a driver's license. As we all know, anybody who's ever rented a car, you have to produce a driver's license to rent a car. So he did that to get that car. So that idea that he didn't fly, he was trying to do this in a sort of a covert way, that's ridiculous. This was done out in the open. He tells several people. He tells his wife. He tells her family. Jerry Lubinsky, who you've heard from. All of those people knew he was going to Florida. He went to Florida regularly. He worked for the Sievers, for Dr. Sievers, for her medical practice. This was not an unusual event for him to travel to Florida. He asked Mr. Rodgers to travel with him because he had trouble driving. As he told you, he had these episodes where he would pass out. He had 2 very serious accidents as a result of that. Mr. Rodgers was just doing a friend a favor. But Wright and Mr. Rodgers, neither of them made any secret of the fact that they were traveling to Florida. Now, that doesn't seem consistent with somebody who was going to commit any kind of a crime. If you were going to Florida to do burglaries, would you tell everybody you knew you were going to Florida? Why would you put yourself in that state? If you're going to go down and commit a murder, it makes absolutely no sense that you would tell people you were going to Florida. But he does. He doesn't seem to care who knows he's going to Florida. He doesn't seem to care who knows that he's going to Florida to work for Teresa Sievers, the person he allegedly has conspired to kill. This isn't any kind of a plan. This is ridiculous. When I asked Detective Levitt, when I was cross-examining him, Jimmy Rodgers didn't make any secret of the fact he was going to Florida, did he? Levitt told you, no, he didn't. Now, according to the state, Jimmy Rodgers had entered into this plan in the middle of May. But he's telling people he's traveling to Florida. He told his boss that. He told Taylor Schumacher that. He's not hiding it from anyone. Here we have yet another person who doesn't seem to care that he's putting himself several states away in a state where somebody is going to be murdered. He doesn't think that's important. That's ridiculous. He told Taylor Schumacher that he was going to Florida to make some extra money. He was going to ride down there with Curtis, who was going down there anyway. He said he made money, $600. He received those payments in $600 increments, $100 a month. They paid him to do his server maintenance and things like that. Now, she was probably happy, Taylor Schumacher, that Jimmy was going to travel to Florida, because she likes money. We've learned that, and we'll talk more about that later. And she likes other people supporting her children and herself. So Jimmy and Curtis, having now informed virtually everybody they could find in the state of Missouri of the fact that they were traveling to Florida, and they were going to be there the 27th to the 29th of June, are off on their trip. Now, let's recall how Curtis Wright, in addition to collecting disability checks, makes his living. He does that but through IT work, as we just talked about. He did it for the Sievers. He did it for a number of people, apparently. He understands how IT systems work. He understands cell phones. He understands Garmin. He understands that if he's hooking his Garmin up, he's tracking himself. And we saw it. We saw the state's evidence, maps of cell phones. They proved repeatedly that they were in Florida. Nobody was denying they were in Florida, but they proved it over and over again. Another thing that Mr. Wright did was install surveillance systems at Walmart. He knew that there were 85 cameras in a Walmart. I didn't know that until Mr. Duvall told us that, but he knew it because he'd installed them. So he understood that if he went into a Walmart, he was being observed. I think we all know that, but he made a point of walking around the store with Mr. Rodgers in full view of everyone. Why would you do that? If you're in another state to commit about as serious a crime as you possibly can, wouldn't you conceal your presence in that state? Of course you would. And this tech-savvy person, Curtis Wayne Wright, would know that hooking that Garmin up would make him trackable, as he was. How could he not know that? He knew it. And Mr. Rodgers is going to use his phone. He brought his cell phone with him. He's going to bring that along for enhanced Garmin features. Come on, folks. That just doesn't pass the smell test. That's ridiculous. And this is their case. This is what they're telling you happened through Mr. Curtis Wright. You heard all of that come from him. Curtis Wright is loathsome. He's slimy. He's a liar. He's all those things. But he's not stupid. You saw him. He sat right there in that chair. He was right here. And he testified to you very quietly, very, very meekly. What happened? He testified, for instance, he told you he received a 25-year sentence for entering into a plea for second-degree murder. If you can pull yourself off that hook and put two other people on the hook, Mark Sievers and Mr. Rodgers, and you can get a sentence that's going to let you walk out of prison in less than 25 years from today, you're no dope. And he's not a dope. And with his training and intelligence, he decides that he's going to hook a Garmin up to his car and drive down and commit this murder. That is ridiculous. The state showed you how easy it was to track that car. Curtis Wright would have known that, but he did it anyway, after renting a car in his name. The trip takes them 20 hours, and they drive straight to the Sievers home on Jarvis. Now, according to Mr. Wright, they go there so that Jimmy can get the lay of the land, kind of see the scene of the crime. Curtis Wright has been to that house many times. He knows what the house looks like. He didn't have to go there. But he says they have to get in and out of there because Mark Sievers' mother might be coming over to feed the dogs, or she's going to come over early in the morning to feed the dogs. Now, Curtis tells us that Mark told him that he wanted this to look like a burglary. They go to this house in the morning, but they can't stay long, according to Curtis. This seems like an opportunity to sort of get one of those, you got your conspiracy to kill somebody list, like, okay, top of that list, Mark Sievers told me, stage a burglary. Okay, go in there and you just start stealing, okay? You start stealing, you start maybe break a window, you pull open drawers. It's not hard. You don't have to be a 5-time convicted felon to know that. You know what a burglary scene looks like. And you start stealing stuff. They don't do that. It would be an opportunity to, stage burglary. Check. Got that done. We can go on and go to the beach now. But they're concerned about Mrs. Sievers coming over to feed the dogs, or Curtis is. This is what he's telling us. Well, then why, if there's a conspiracy and he's got this code going back and forth with Mark Sievers, why go there at all? Why go there then? Why not go there later? Why not contact Mark in code? Mark, has your mother fed the dogs yet? Other. No, he doesn't do that. They go in, they go out, they leave, because he doesn't know when she's going to come. All right, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense either. So they don't stage the burglary, well, with one exception. Curtis does pry the door a little bit, but as we were told, that's Curtis Wright's testimony. That's the extent of any kind of staging of a burglary that was done, if he even did that. There's no way those crime scene people were able to determine when that happened. Now, he wasn't so concerned that he didn't use the passcode on the garage door to open the garage door around 6 a.m. in the morning and walk in this house. He went in the house. He opened the door. He knew the code. He doesn't have to break into the home. He has access to the home. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's nothing that the state has provided to show you that Jimmy Ray Rodgers was ever even in that house. Nothing. Not a shred of evidence. The only thing they have is what that liar had to tell you, the 5-time convicted felon, what he told you, but they have no evidence to put him in there. But Curtis Wright, even if he did go in, Curtis Wright opened the door. So what? If you see someone open the door to a house with a key, with a passcode, do you think, hey, wait a second, is this guy, can he go in that house? Of course you think he can go in the house. So there's no burglary on his part. He wasn't in the house. They haven't proven that. If he had gone in the house, well, why wouldn't he? This guy's opening the door. Now, if you are in the house, as Mr. Wright said, for this brief period of time, you heard various officers testify that there were hundreds of dollars laying around in this house. I mean, excluding that $40,000 plus in cash that's in the safe. Mark Sievers has told Curtis Wayne Wright, make this look like a burglary. Okay, well, here's a chance to make it look like a burglary. Start stealing money that's laying around in the house. Jewelry that's laying around in the house. Maybe guns that are laying around the house. Maybe take some stuff. Mark Sievers has given you a license to steal. You wouldn't take that? You're somebody greedy enough to kill a person for money, according to Curtis Wayne Wright, but you don't steal money that's laying around in a house? That's ridiculous. Like this case is ridiculous. And just an aside, that $40,000 in cash that's sitting in that safe, Mark Sievers gets this whole, you saw the thing, Mark Sievers is in the middle, Jimmy and Curtis and all that, he's at the center of the conspiracy, the big conspirator. He left $40,000 in cash sitting in a safe in his house. Think about that. He knows he's set the wheels in motion. His wife is going to be dead in that house in hours or after he gets back from his vacation. But before he goes on that vacation, he doesn't think, hey, wait a second, I better take this $40,000. Because, this house is going to be a crime scene. That $40,000, that's going to end up in an evidence locker. I'm not going to have access to it. Maybe I can use that money to pay these hitmen. Maybe I can do that with cash that nobody is aware of, as opposed to writing a check out of my wife's medical practice for $600. Doesn't make sense. So after their 5-minute trip where they don't steal anything, they don't stage a burglary, they don't do anything at the house, they go on their tour of Southwest Florida. And they go everywhere but the shell factory. I mean, they go everywhere. They're like tourists. They're looking around. They go to the beach. They go to souvenir shops. They go to Walmart. They did that at 11 a.m. Now, Curtis Wright knows that there are cameras all over Walmart. Okay, they've been to Bonita Beach. They've napped there. They've done all this. They're driving all around. They go to Walmart and buy water shoes. They buy a Budweiser t-shirt, wet wipes. Jimmy buys a pair of shoes. They never found any blood or fibers on the shoes. And a screwdriver set. That sounds like a standard shopping day at Walmart. Now, that screwdriver set, they tried to turn that into some sort of a, sort of a sinister thing, a lock set. It's a screwdriver set. He admitted that on cross-examination. Yeah, okay, no, not really anything. It's just a screwdriver set. None of those items were ever shown to have any relevance to the murder of Dr. Sievers. Now, you recall, as we said earlier, that Mr. Wright, in his testimony, told you that he installed surveillance systems for Walmart. What, did he go in and disable it while he was there? He knows something about it. He didn't. They showed them. They're walking into Walmart. Not a worry in the world. They're not wearing hats pulled down. They don't have hoodies on there. They just walk into Walmart. Who would do that if they're out of state away from their homes in a city where they know that a person is going to be murdered because they're going to murder them. No one would do that. That is senseless. That's ridiculous. That isn't a plan. You would conceal your presence. But, according to Curtis Wainwright, the state's star witness for the prosecution, they returned to the beach after their trip to Walmart. It's now afternoon. Mrs. Sievers, obviously, Mark's mother, has been in and out of the house feeding the dogs. Wouldn't you now return to the house to stage that burglary? Wouldn't you go back and just start stealing things? There was literally a frame of money on the wall. They had money framed. There's money everywhere. There's money in the drawers in the office, on the wall. They don't take a nickel out of this house. Again, these are people so greedy, they would take money to take another woman's life, but they won't take cash out of a drawer? It doesn't make any sense. That's fiction. So they go back to the beach, and Curtis Wright told you, in his rather ironic way, that they were killing time. They don't have a plan yet, according to Mr. Wright. They don't have a weapon. They haven't staged a burglary. They haven't gotten a whole lot done towards carrying out this conspiracy. They have access to the house because Curtis Wright knows the passcode. And all of this was told to you by Mr. Wright himself. And they go back to the beach knowing that Dr. Sievers isn't going to be back in town for another 12 hours. Folks, you kill time, you waste time. If you get to town and the person you're going to visit, they're not home yet. They're not going to get off work for 3 or 4 hours. Maybe you go and you get a drink. Maybe you go to the library. You go to the mall. You kill time. If you're here with a plan and you have things to do to carry out that plan, you do that. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. But they don't. They go to the beach. Curtis Wright and Jimmy Ray Rodgers, they weren't here to kill anybody. Curtis Wright wasn't even here to kill anybody. He was down here to work. And he probably thought, with this open marriage thing and Mark out of town, who knows, maybe something could come out of that too. And we'll talk about that later. But if you're here to kill somebody, you stage a burglary, you steal everything you can carry out of that house, you pull out drawers, you open cabinets, you break a window, you make sure you have a safe way out of town when you're done doing what you have to do. You don't kill time. You don't waste time. That is ridiculous. Maybe, just maybe, you'd find a place to hide in that house so you could have the element of surprise on the target of your murder plan. You don't kill time. It's a nice air-conditioned house. Why would you be outside? These two are from Missouri. It's June, July in Florida. It's hot. They have access to a nice house. Go in there, nobody sees you. Especially not the victim. That is a fantasy. That is a lie. That man is a liar. He's a murderer and a liar. He couldn't tell the truth. He wouldn't tell you the truth if it would suit him better than a lie. He's just a liar. So, after returning to the beach, not getting anything done towards their conspiracy, around 10:30, Mr. Wright tells us that they returned to the home on Jarvis. And he said they got into the garage and it was really hot in that garage. As it probably was, it would be. He says that Curtis Wainwright and Jimmy Ray Rodgers then put on their jumpsuits. They placed duct tape around the wrists, duct tape around the ankles. Then, just to make it unbearably hot, they put on these latex gloves. Now, Curtis Wainwright at this point is sealed in a bag of his own body heat in this hot garage. That's his testimony. And he has no idea where Jimmy Rodgers is, his co-conspirator, according to Mr. Wright. And while he's in this miserable condition, without knowing where his co-conspirator is, he gets sidetracked looking at Mark Sievers' motorcycle. He's looking at a motorcycle. He's not doing anything in furtherance of this conspiracy. He's not, again, throwing open cabinets, stealing money, pulling out drawers. Why wouldn't he do that? Because he wouldn't want to alert Dr. Sievers to it? Well, according to their plan, she's not going to be around very long, according to what Mr. Wright is telling us. So that doesn't make any difference. You would go ahead and stage the burglary first. You don't wait to do the murder. You get that done because after the murder happens, you're probably going to want to head out of there. But they don't do that. They're suited up, according to Mr. Wright. And then as Curtis is looking at Mr. Sievers' motorcycle, he hears the door opens. The light goes on, the door opens. Now, I wasn't clear if he was saying the lights weren't on and the light came on, and is he looking at the motorcycle in the dark? It's hard to tell from his testimony, but he said that the door opener, Dr. Sievers clicked the door and it started going up. And everything began from there. Curtis Wright said that he was startled by that, and he jumped to take cover and hid behind some boxes. Well, he's got to be sweating like a pig at this point. And the state told you that they swabbed everything. They looked for DNA everywhere. They didn't find any sweat in that garage from a guy in a jumpsuit hiding behind some boxes. And they looked, but they didn't find that. And how easy is it to hide? This is a standard two-car garage, folks. This isn't a mansion. It's a nice house. It's a big house. But it's a two-car garage, 20 by 20. There aren't a whole lot of places to hide. But he managed to do that. Dr. Sievers pulls into the garage, gets out of her car, according to Mr. Wright, unloads some luggage, and she goes into her home. Now, he said when that happened, it caused him to panic. He was afraid when she went in the house. Now, even now, Mr. Wright, according to his testimony, he still doesn't have a plan. He hasn't armed himself. So he stealthily follows Dr. Sievers into her home. And as he's following her, he sees a hammer on the freezer. And this may be the only truth that came out of his mouth. He says he saw the hammer. The attack was never meant to be done with a hammer. They hadn't planned on using a hammer. He saw the hammer, and he grabbed it. And he went after Dr. C. Oh, he kicked the dog bowl with the hammer in his hand. Now, let me just back up for a second. Dr. Coyne, the medical examiner, he told us that people don't plan to kill with hammers. People are angry, they see hammers, and they kill people. Hammers are not hitman tools. They're messy. Dr. Coyne told us that too. If you're going to kill somebody for money, I don't think you're looking to turn it into an exercise opportunity. I think you just want to kill them, leave, get away with it, and get your money. You're not looking to make a statement. Killing with hammers, that's what people do when they're enraged. So according to Wright, he's got his hammer, he's walking behind Dr. Sievers, she's unaware of his presence, and then he kicks this dog bowl and she's alerted. And at that point, that's where Curtis Wright attacks the doctor. He told you that he hit her in the back of the head the first time. And he also told you, in the same breath, that after walking up behind her and hitting her in the back of the head, she looked surprised. How would he know what she looked like? He hit her in the back. That's a lie. He's lying when he tells you that. Curtis Wright walked up behind Dr. Sievers for whatever reasons, and we'll talk about that. He walked up and he grabbed her by the hair, bent her over, and hit her in the face. Forced her down on the ground. That's what the evidence supports, not his cockamamie story. There's evidence in that kitchen, real evidence, not the words of a maniac, of a convicted killer. Curtis Wright said he hit her 2 more times. At some point, Curtis Wright is hitting Teresa Sievers, and she isn't screaming, she isn't crying. As Ms. Ross said, she said, "Why?" This was very hard for Curtis Wright to tell you. He was all choked up. He's a very compelling performer. He just happens to be a liar. I don't think if a person is being attacked in their kitchen by a barrel-chested maniac with a hammer wearing a spacesuit, that you're going to say, why? You're going to scream. That woman must have been terrified when she knew what was happening to her. And I don't think she was saying why. That's just another part of this fabrication. Curtis Wright has a tendency when he tells his stories, and he tells a lot of them, and a lot of them are recorded. There are 6 of those. When he tells these stories, Curtis Wright, no matter how bad what he did is, always kind of puts a positive spin on it for Curtis Wright. He's not a bad guy, he's just a killer. And he likes to portray himself as better than he actually is. He says after he hits Mrs. Sievers 3 times, 3 times. Jimmy Wright comes running in. And he approaches on the right. And he's in a frenzy of bloodlust. He's swinging this hammer with both hands. He's just gone totally crazy. He doesn't even know this woman. He's never met her. How does he work up all this anger for Dr. Sievers? He doesn't know her. Curtis Wright knows her. But Jimmy Rodgers has never met her. But he's in a frenzy. Well, that doesn't really comport very well with the evidence either. According to Wright, when Jimmy attacked her, according to Wright, she was on her feet. And he just launched into this attack, swinging, hitting her. But the evidence shows, Detective Nolan told us, that the blood in that kitchen, the spatter, remember spatter, when you hit a blood source, it disperses the blood? It's no higher than 2.5 feet. And Dr. Sievers was a small woman. But if she was on her feet, and she was being hit in the head in the way that Curtis Wright described Jimmy Rodgers as having done that in his fever dream, there would have been blood higher than 2.5 feet. That blood would have dispersed out. It would have been much higher. And it's not. And there's no arguing against that. That's the fact. And he says that Mr. Rodgers was between him and Dr. Sievers as he's beating her in this frenzy. But that just simply doesn't square with the facts. It can't be true. And I wouldn't be too surprised, after everything that you've examined about that man's testimony so far, that it's not true. He's a liar. He's making up a story to please the people who are giving him a very good deal. Now again, as I said, Curtis Wright has this tendency, when he speaks about the hideous things that he's done, to always sort of make himself out to be kind of a good guy. And he says, as Jimmy Rodgers, the person who doesn't know Dr. Sievers, has never met Dr. Sievers, is in his homicidal rage beating Dr. Sievers, who's on her feet. He tells him, that's enough. Please stop. Curtis Wright told you, admitted that he hit this woman 3 times. Again, he's always going to sort of, kind of soft sell what he's done. How could that be? Now, another thing Detective Nolan told us, Detective Nolan's not a rookie, okay? He was the lead investigator on this case initially. Been around a long time. He told you that he has extensive homicide experience. He told you that when he entered that crime scene, the first thing that he noticed, and it surprised him, was the lack of cast-off. This is a bludgeoning death, folks. There's blood. There's lots of blood. Dr. Sievers was laying in a pool of her own blood. But, unlike the vast majority of other bludgeoning scenes that Detective Nolan had been to, there was no cast-off. And remember what cast-off is. Cast-off is when you hit a blood source, a wound, with a weapon, and you pull it out, you spray blood. You spray blood on the wall, on the ceiling, you come back, you even get a little more from that. You hit that source again, you spray blood on the wall, on the ceiling, blood, tissue. None of that. It's not there. And no one was puzzled by that. He's been to a number of these things. He's been investigating homicides for a long time. He didn't understand that. Remember Dr. Coyne again. Dr. Coyne told us a lot of interesting things. And one of them was, no two people swing a hammer the same way. Cast-off is present at blunt trauma scenes, almost universally, and yet it wasn't there. How could two people, according to Curtis Wright, who says he and Mr. Rodgers were swinging hammers at this woman, how could it be that two people with their own unique swings both have swings that don't produce cast-off? That's a lie. Curtis Wright's the only one who ever hit that woman. And he's lying to you to save his own worthless skin. Curtis Wright sat there, he told you that hammer that they found, the hammer that was so soaked in blood that they couldn't get any other evidence off it, they couldn't get fingerprints off it, they couldn't get any trace evidence off that. They found hair in the claw. That hammer, the hammer that Dr. Coyne matched up to every wound on Teresa Sievers, that's the hammer Curtis Wright told you he dropped at the scene. He told you that. He doesn't know what Jimmy did with his hammer. Well, yeah, Jimmy didn't have a hammer. All Jimmy Rodgers did was help what he thought was a friend come to do a job.
Objection. That's not evidence.
Sustained.
Again, the state has not produced a shred, not a scintilla of evidence that Jimmy Rodgers was ever even in that house. Nothing. They don't have anything to put him in there. The only thing that they have, and they can go through their list of witnesses, and the fact of the matter is the only thing they have is the word of Curtis Wright. That's their case. Curtis Wright. The world's most sensitive hammer killer. That story that you were treated to was a story that was composed after hours and hours of talking to that man, and him initially denying he'd been to Florida. Heck, he'd never even heard of Florida when the story started. Oh, by the end of it, there was a big conspiracy. They were going to do that. Kept talking. Talk. They got him to say what they wanted him to say. They want Mark Sievers. They have a theory. They have a square peg, and they are going to force it in a round hole, and they don't care what they have to do that. They are convinced Mark Sievers killed his wife for money, for insurance. But they don't have any proof of it except for that liar that you listen to. And they can bring in people to talk about cell tower pings and big rings and little rings. So what? They proved Jimmy Rodgers and Curtis Wainwright came to Florida. They didn't deny that. They told anybody who would listen to them that. But they proved it over and over and over again. They want to put a seed in your head that somehow or other that they hadn't said they were coming here. They did. They're feathering a lack of evidence by telling you things over and over again. showing you maps of them traveling to Florida. They said they were coming to Florida. Curtis Wright hooked his Garmin up in his rental car that he used his name, his driver's license, to obtain. It's no big secret. So after this assault on the doctor, Curtis Wright and Jimmy Rodgers leave the state of Florida. They don't stage the burglary. They get in the car and they run for Missouri. They're panicked. But why? Why would they be panicked? Isn't this the outcome they had planned? Dr. Sievers was going to be dead. Well, no. Curtis Wright and Jimmy Rodgers hadn't planned for that. This was never a murder for hire. The two of them ran out of Florida like scalded dogs. They just took off. They wanted to get out of here. They wanted to put as much distance between them and that crime scene as possible, because this was just something that went terribly wrong. Curtis Wright didn't intend to kill anyone. Mark Sievers never set up his wife to be murdered. His wife was the breadwinner in that family, folks. It's like killing the goose that lays the golden egg. He's living, basically, this is their arrangement. She's making good money. He has no reason to kill her, certainly not for money. They've produced no evidence that there was ever any affair or anything, any other lover or anybody. There's no evidence of that. Just what this guy says, Curtis Wright. They've built a whole case on what a liar has to tell you. And there's another liar coming. One wasn't enough. They actually had to pick another one. Whether Dr. Sievers was surprised by him being at the house at 11:30 and was nasty in the way she told him, "What are you doing here?" Or perhaps she rebuffed in advance by him.
Objection. Facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
The fact of the matter is that this was a crime of rage. This isn't a contract killing. The thing that makes contract murder unnerving to us all is the cold-blooded, calculated nature of it. That's what bothers us all. It's like that somebody could kill another person and their only motive be money. Killings with hammers, again, Dr. Coyne told us, they're not motivated by anything other than rage. People get angry, they see a hammer, and they strike their victim. They strike their victim. They don't start after 3 times and stop. They're in a rage. The important number here isn't 3, it isn't 10, it isn't 17, it's 1. If you can hit a person 1 time with a hammer, there's no limit to how many times you can hit them. You have to cross a pretty wide psychological barrier to take a hammer and hit a person in the face, in the head. That's a special category of killing, and you have to be really over the top to do that. You have to be mad, like you can't even imagine the anger somebody would have to do something like that. How sick you'd have to be to do something like that. That's a sick guy. He's told you he met the number 1. He was able to do it. He told you that. That is an evidence. He said it. The state showed you some videos. These are the videos. And these are videos of Walmart, videos of a couple of gas stations. The Walmart video was before this happened. The gas stations are when they're leaving. I want you, when you go back to deliberate, I want you to look at those videos again. Because you're going to find something interesting in those videos. When Jimmy Rodgers and Curtis Wayne Wright walk into Walmart at 11 o'clock in the morning, Jimmy Rodgers is wearing black shorts and that white wicking t-shirt. He's got that on. Curtis Wright is also dressed. Look at the way he's dressed in that video as he goes in the store. Then I want you to look at them when they're driving back up to Missouri. Jimmy Wright, you saw him, just showed him walking into the gas station. He's wearing the same clothes. Curtis Wright, he's changed. He's wearing different clothes. The clothes he was wearing at Walmart, they're all covered with blood. So he had to change those and get into something else. I'm asking you to look for yourself. Look at those videos. Now they get back to Missouri, Mr. Rodgers, Mr. Wright, and the word of Dr. Sievers' death gets around. And think about this. Mr. Wright went back to Florida to attend Dr. Sievers' funeral. Literally hours after he got through hitting a 5'1" woman in the head repeatedly with a hammer, he went back to Florida to her funeral. And Curtis Wayne Wright spent days in Florida consoling family members, friends. Probably he's speaking in that very low voice that he used with you. He consoled the children of the woman whose funeral he'd caused. Think about that. If you need any further convincing that that man who sat there in front of you isn't a totally immoral liar and a very accomplished liar, you don't have to think any further than that. He looked at these people, at her friends, at her family. He looked at them, and he convinced them they didn't think he had anything to do with it. And he consoled them. And as he told Miss Fitzgeorge, he hugged her children. That man is evil. He is an evil person. Who could do that? Maybe the same kind of person who can work it up inside themselves to hit somebody with a hammer. Maybe he's that kind of a person. After the funeral, things start to settle down a little bit. Lee County Sheriff's Office is investigating this. As Detective Lebed told me, Mark Sievers, from day one, was a suspect in this case. That's not unusual. He's the husband. Again, even though Detective Lebed wasn't as forthcoming with how crimes are generally committed, usually crimes are committed between people who know each other. They're not committed stranger on stranger. They're people who know each other, people who love each other frequently. And so Mark Sievers was a suspect. Mark Sievers is friends with Curtis Wainwright. And Detective Levitt and Detective Downs go out to Missouri. They start looking around. And they begin this process of interviewing Mr. Wright. And that's a long process that I'll return to later. Now, since Curtis Wright and Jimmy Rodgers made no secret of the fact that they were going to Florida, they began trying to talk to Curtis Wright's neighbors. According to, I believe, both detectives Down and Levitt, nobody would talk to them. They just wouldn't talk about Curtis Wainwright. People are scared of Curtis Wainwright.
Objection, facts not evidence.
Rule.
People know better than to talk about Curtis Wainwright. He's a criminal, folks. 5-time convicted felon. Another word for convicted felon, that's criminal. He's a criminal. And people in Missouri knew he was a criminal. And they didn't have anything to say about him. They didn't care what it was about. Don't know anything about Curtis Wainwright. Now, Detective Downs told you Mr. Rodgers denied initially being in Florida when Mr. Rodgers knew they were investigating Curtis Wainwright. Well, like everybody else in Missouri, Mr. Rodgers knew Mr. Wright.
Objection, Your Honor, facts not evidence.
Sustained.
May we approach, Judge?
Sure.
Who knew Mr. Wright, were afraid of him. They weren't going to talk about him. And Jimmy Rodgers knew Mr. Wright. That's established. That's true. He was afraid of him too. And I would imagine he was probably even more afraid of him.
Objection, facts not evidence.
Sustained its argument. Go ahead. Overruled, rather. Sorry.
Mr. Rodgers knew a little bit more than even the people in Curtis Wainwright's neighborhood. He knew Curtis Wainwright was capable of beating someone to death with a hammer. So if he wasn't like jumping on board the Lebanon Downs, let's get Curtis Wainwright train, I think that's to have been expected. During this trip, the detectives began speaking to another one of their hired witnesses, and that's Taylor Schumacher. Now, she required a little prompting from the detectives. Initially, they isolated her, and Detective Downs denied that they threatened her, but they did tell her, or he told her at one point, maybe you're involved in this conspiracy to commit murder. Her kids are there. What if they think she is involved in that? Maybe they're going to arrest her. Who's going to watch her kids? Are they going to go to the Children and Family Services? I mean, that's not an outcome any mother's really looking to have happen. That's a threat. So she got on board. That got her attention. I guess it would. She's got 2 kids and she was pregnant at the time. Now, when they talked to Ms. Schumacher, a couple of months have passed since Dr. Sievers has been murdered. Ms. Schumacher is living with her children and Jimmy Rodgers. During that time, she hasn't contacted the police. She continues to live with Mr. Rodgers. Then Lebanon Downs turn up at the house. They speak to them and they leave. Now, Taylor Schumacher, when she's up on the stand, tells you at that point, Jimmy tells her it's time to take a ride. Got to take a ride. 2 months have gone by, and supposedly he's kept this cell phone and jumpsuit and all these allegedly incriminating items. Why? Why would you keep this stuff? If you were involved in something like that, wouldn't you get rid of the evidence that linked you to it? So, according to Ms. Schumacher, they traveled to Doe Run. And Jimmy Rodgers goes there and gets his cell phone. He puts it underwater. He breaks it up. And he keeps the pieces of the cell phone. And they go out and they throw it out of the car. Really? Does that make sense? We heard from Jeff Conway, and he described the facility at Doe Run. He said they recycle batteries, car batteries, truck batteries, even train batteries, big batteries. It's a big industrial site. They have a machine that shreds batteries. Car batteries, probably scores at a time. This is a big machine. Jimmy Rodgers had access to that machine. That seems like a good place to get rid of an unwanted cell phone. Rather than running it underwater and breaking it up and throwing it out the window of a car, why not throw it into this shredding machine? Then on this same trip, out by Doe Run, Ms. Schumacher throws a jumpsuit out the window of the car. You remember she identified that as being Mr. Rodgers' suit. This blue jumpsuit by the side of the road, without any blood on it. Now, the state would have you believe that it laid out there, it was mowed over, and it rained on it. And rained on it, and what? What does it rain seltzer in Missouri? I mean, how did it get the blood off that jumpsuit? There's no blood on that jumpsuit. That was used in this horrible crime? Of course not. And they've got this hair. They've got Curtis Wright. They've got Taylor Schumacher. We'll continue with Ms. Schumacher. And this hair. That hair couldn't be matched to Mr. Rodgers. He couldn't be excluded from it. Him and probably a few thousand other people in Missouri. That's not a match. Did they find a long hair on there from Teresa Sievers? They didn't find her blood on there. Did they find Taylor Schumacher's DNA on that jumpsuit? Anything from her? She threw it out the window. Didn't her hair get on there? No, they found this one hair that doesn't even match him. They just can't exclude him. Another thing that jumpsuit doesn't have on it, any residue from duct tape, or even the duct tape itself. If you were in a hurry to get out of that suit, you just cut the duct tape off and jump out of it and still have the duct tape on there? Or if you didn't have the duct tape on there, wouldn't glue from the duct tape be on there? That's not evidence. They didn't find any glue on that. There was no duct tape ever placed around the wrists or the ankles of that jumpsuit. If you're going to do run, why don't you throw your cell phone into the shredder and maybe take the jumpsuit, throw that in the laundry? Why would you throw it out the window? There's 3,000 other jumpsuits sitting there waiting to be laundered, but you're going to throw a jumpsuit out the window. Why not just throw it in the pile of jumpsuits? No, they don't do that. Again, the story that's being crafted, it's not even possible. It's too ridiculous to be true. Now, Ms. Schumacher, in her direct, was very childlike. She sat with her hair over her face, spoke in a very low voice. She eventually changed, but she told you that when she confronted Jimmy about the doctor's murder, that he said yes, and he did it with a hammer, and was supposed to get $10,000. Then we heard that in 2016, Taylor Schumacher called Detective Downs and asked him for money. She's a witness in a murder case, and she's asking for money. And if that wasn't appalling enough, she got it. They gave her money, $400 every month, for a grand total to date of $18,650. When Ms. Fitzgeorge was crossing Ms. Schumacher, boy, she changed. She remembered a lot less. She didn't seem like the scared country girl we'd met originally. She seemed pretty assertive. Sort of like she's as much a country girl who's scared as Curtis Wright is a good citizen who wants to do the right thing. Taylor Schumacher's a grifter. She'd do anything for money. Jimmy Rodgers had been her meal ticket, working extra shifts at Doe Run to support her and her kids. Now she has the taxpayers of Lee County to do that for her. $400 every month, $18,600. All you got to do is testify. That's an arrangement that Detective Levin, who's now a lieutenant, told you he'd never seen that before. Dave Levin's been around a while. He's seen a lot of stuff. He's seen a lot of things in that agency, and he never saw anybody getting paid like that before out of that program. One thing that Taylor Schumacher said that was true was that she never heard anybody call Jimmy Ray Rodgers the Hammer. Ever. She never heard that. And she kind of had to be honest about that. Because if anybody had ever heard her or heard him called that by other people, they would have had a little parade of people coming in here saying, oh, yeah, I went to kindergarten with Jimmy Rodgers, and, yeah, we used to call him the Hammer. And then they'd bring somebody in from high school. Yeah, I played football with Jimmy Rodgers in high school, and he was a defensive back. We used to call him the Hammer. Then they bring somebody from Doe Run. They didn't have anybody. Nobody's ever heard him called the Hammer. And she told you that. Another thing that Ms. Schumacher was told is that there might be a $55,000 payday in her future. Taylor Schumacher is going to make more money out of this contract killing than he ever made. He never got a dime. There's never been any money go from Mark Sievers to Mr. Rodgers, Curtis Wright to Mr. Rodgers. There's no money trail because no money passed hands in this murder for profit. But Taylor Schumacher, she's cleaning up. She's got her $18,650 in the bank. She's got a potential $55,000 coming to her. She got first and last month's rent to get a new apartment. Why? Because she's scared of what? When she went and got that apartment, Curtis Wright and Jimmy Rodgers, they were in custody. There was no way for anybody to hurt her. They just gave her more money, gave her a nicer place to live. They took several recorded statements from Taylor Schumacher. She gave you some vague answers about the jumpsuit, the backpack, the cooler. She testified to there being, she didn't testify, rather, that there was any blood, any long hair, anything linking those items to Dr. Sievers. Nothing. She did remember pictures that Jimmy had on his phone from his little vacation to Florida. Again, who comes to an area to commit a crime and takes pictures placing themselves in that area? That is senseless. She also told you in this conversation in the bedroom on cross-examination that she didn't know if Jimmy had said, "We used a hammer" or "he used a hammer." She wasn't sure. That's kind of important, but she's not sure. And this is what the state's case consists of. Testimony from Curtis Wainwright, testimony from Taylor Schumacher, hairs that don't match him, but he can't be excluded. And then the fiber they say they found on the doctor's leg. The state tells you, the FBI told you in their PowerPoint presentation. There's a little disclaimer, and it says this: fiber is not a means of positive identification. Curtis Wright, Taylor Schumacher, hair that's not his, fibers that don't conclusively prove anything. That's their case. In a preposterous story. If the state is going to come in here and accuse a person of murdering Dr. Sievers for money, they have an obligation bring more evidence than inconclusive fibers, inconclusive hair, and paid for witnesses. One thing that we know for sure, and I touched on earlier, is that when Jimmy got home, he didn't have any more money than he did before he left. No money was paid to him from anyone. Not from Curtis, not from Mark. He doesn't know Dr. Sievers. He has no reason to want to hurt her, to want to do anything to her. If there was a motive, it would have been money. Well, there isn't any money. It makes no sense. They put up a little, sign up here. Common sense. Yeah, use your common sense. That sound like common sense to you? That somebody would travel to Florida, let everybody know they were coming down here, commit a murder, and make no effort to conceal that. That's absurd. Taylor Schumacher also told you Mr. Rodgers didn't have multiple phones. He had one phone. Or he had a backup phone that he used the SIM card in. He had one phone number. He was never involved in this business with coded messages. Taylor Schumacher told you that Jimmy Rodgers was a good father. He was a good provider. He was a hard worker. He was good to her children. Now, initially, when she was asked by Ms. Fitzgeorge, Taylor Schumacher denied categorically that she had any association with Netflix. She had not spoken with their representatives. She and her now husband had not been flown to California to meet with their representatives. Netflix had not put them up in a hotel. And within a span of a couple of minutes, we find out that none of that was true. She had gone to California. She had met with Netflix. She's looking to make money out of that. She's a grifter. She's looking to make money. She'd do anything to get it. That woman would tell you anything for money. They ever introduce her to George Clooney, there's no telling what she would do. She'll tell you anything. You can't give 1 ounce of credibility to her testimony. You can't give an ounce of credibility to Mr. Wright's testimony. This case is simply a continuation of a bad theory developed by the police. They believe Mark Sievers killed his wife for insurance money. Again, they had a square peg and they were trying to fit it in a round hole. It never works. Again, I want to tell you that Mr. Rodgers doesn't have to put on any evidence in this case. Proving this case, that's the burden of the state. If they can prove their case. And they can't. Not with that disgraceful testimony from people that are being paid to come in here and testify. Mr. Rodgers has the presumption of innocence like we discussed during jury selection. That continues. He is presumed innocent. And they have done nothing to overcome that. You can't pay witnesses to come in and tell people what they want to hear to get a conviction. You have to produce real evidence to do that. There has been nothing shown to you that Jimmy Rodgers was involved in a conspiracy. This idea is ridiculous that Mark Sievers got this going, and there's been no evidence of any of that. Most of all, there's been no evidence that anybody made any money off of it. That's a conspiracy. When people have some reason, they're in a common cause to do. Curtis Wright came down here and went crazy and killed somebody. That doesn't mean he's in a conspiracy with him. It means he had the misfortune of being with him. To prove the crime of conspiracy, the state must prove the following two elements beyond a reasonable doubt. The intent of Jimmy Ray Rodgers was that the offense of first-degree murder would be committed. How has that been proven? There's no evidence of that. In order to carry out that intent, Jimmy Ray Rodgers agreed, conspired, combined, or confederated with Mark Sievers and Curtis Wayne Wright to cause the death of Teresa Sievers to be committed, either by them, or one of them, or by some other person. There's no evidence of any of that other than what Curtis Wright tells you. Curtis Wright's composing a story. He's writing a novel. And there'll be an instruction on principles. Ms. Ross covered this. If the defendant helped another person or persons commit a crime, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if he had done all the things the other person had done. They have to show that he had a conscious intent that the criminal act be done. They have not proven that, folks. Jimmy Rodgers had no involvement in the beating death of Dr. Sievers. The evidence at the scene proves that. One person did that, and that person was Curtis Wayne Wright, in a rage of his own, not involving Mr. Rodgers at all. You'll receive an instruction on independent act. I'm just reading from parts of it. An independent act occurs when a person, other than Jimmy Ray Rodgers, commits or attempts to commit a crime. That is what I am talking about. Mr. Wright developed the intent quickly in his rage to kill Dr. Sievers. He told you. He saw the hammer and he picked it up and attacked her with it. That's not a conspiracy. If you're there, that doesn't mean you're part of it. It means he flipped out and attacked somebody. That's the independent act. Jimmy didn't participate in this. There's no evidence that more than one person did this. Dr. Coyne told you that. And the state to just argue in the contrary, oh, well, there's no evidence that it didn't happen. There's no evidence that it did happen. There's nothing to show the two people hit that woman. That one hammer, that Curtis Wayne Wright told you he dropped on the floor, that's the only hammer that was compared to those wounds, and it matched all of them. He didn't say hey, here, I've done 3, you do the rest. He never passed that hammer to anybody. He told you that he dropped the hammer, his hammer. He claimed it. Now, Mr. Rodgers has entered a plea of not guilty. He stands by that plea. A plea of not guilty, you must presume or believe the defendant is innocent. Mr. Rodgers is innocent. That presumption stays with Mr. Rodgers unless the state is able to prove its case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, every element of every charge, beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. Mr. Rodgers, as I said, is not required to present any evidence. weighing the evidence is going to be very important in this case. And let me go through what you should consider regarding witnesses. First, did the witness, Ms. Schumacher, Mr. Wright, seem to have an opportunity to see and know things about what they were testifying about? You'll have to give that whatever weight you think is necessary. Mr. Wright certainly can testify about the murder. He committed it. He's admitted that. He's pled to it. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Well, Mr. Wright has told you he has memory issues, so you'll have to take that into account. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? Taylor Schumacher was not particularly cooperative after her coddling direct. After that, she became very combative. In fact, she was caught in a lie that I just described regarding Netflix and her involvement with them. Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? Well, they're being paid. Curtis Wright's plea agreement, his cooperation, that's a part of his agreement. To come in here and testify. Keep his keepers happy. Ms. Schumacher, as I said, she's made almost $20,000 off this arrangement. Has the witness been convicted of a felony? Well, Mr. Wright has been convicted of 5 felonies, so many that he had trouble remembering when he was on the stand. He wasn't sure how many there were. Ladies and gentlemen, Curtis Wright murdered Teresa Sievers in a rage. That's the only conclusion that can be drawn from the evidence that you have. Dr. Coyne told you that the hammer recovered from the scene was the hammer used in the attack. Curtis Wright told you that that hammer was the hammer that he used. The blood at the scene, according to Detective Nolan, indicates a rather unique delivery of blows that didn't generate any cast-off. Now that's important. Not because I say it's important because Detective Nolan thinks it's important. That indicates that one individual did this, and that individual is the person who's admitted to doing it, Curtis Wright. Dr. Coyne again told you everybody swings a hammer in a unique way. We don't do anything the same way. We're individuals. Coyne told you he found no evidence of more than one hammer being used. He found no evidence of more than a single individual delivering the blows. Dr. Coyne is a scientist. He's a physician. He received all of his information regarding this case before he performed his examination from the state. That room where he conducted the autopsy was filled with high-ranking members of local law enforcement. Dr. Coyne's not my witness. He's the state's witness. But he's making my case. He told you this is one person, one hammer. And that person is Curtis Wayne Wright. Again, as I said earlier, the number of blows isn't as important as the first blow. Any person who can overcome that barrier that we all have about doing something so heinous, that person is a very sick and twisted human being. As Dr. Coyne told you, crimes like this are personal. Using a hammer is personal, and it's a crime of opportunity. People see a hammer when they're in some sort of an argument, or they're having some problem with another person, and they just get angrier and angrier, and they see that hammer and they just come after them. This isn't something somebody plans to do. This is something that happens. It's tragic every time it happens. It's tragic here. Dr. Sievers did not deserve to die like that. A crime like that comes from deep within a very angry, very disturbed person. Curtis Wright meets both of those elements. The state of Florida is required to bring you a case, but instead, they brought you a docudrama. Heller Schomacher, she read her lines. She performed. She played the role of a scared country girl, cashed her $400 checks. And Curtis Wainwright, he wrote the screenplay. Recall when I asked Detective Lebed if he thought Wright was a liar. He said, yeah. He tells the truth when it's convenient for Curtis Wainwright. I then asked Detective Lebed if getting the truth out of Curtis Wainwright, was that more of a process than an event? And he said, yeah, it was a process. It wasn't an event. The only problem, folks, is that the truth, that is an event. It's not a process. If I were to be asked right now what time it is, it's 4:25. You don't have to put me through a process. You don't have to ask me that in different ways, different times, with various incentives. It's a fact. It's 4:25. That's the truth. A process, on the other hand, that's creative. When you discuss the facts of a case over and over and over again, you're creating a case. You're composing a case, like you compose a song. You're writing a case, like you write a novel. You can write a docudrama about conspiracies to commit murder with a process, but you won't get to the truth with a process. You get to the outcome that the people who are paying for the process, that's what you get. That's what we got here. Curtis Wainwright was given his life back by cooperating with the state, participating in this process, honing his story until it was just right, until it was good enough to come in here to court. You write screenplays in Hollywood, they can't give you your life back. They can pay you a lot. They can't do that much for you. There was no conspiracy here. Curtis Wainwright got into some sort of an argument, disagreement, heated with Dr. Sievers.
Objection. Facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Jimmy Ray Rodgers helped a friend who had problems falling asleep while he drove. And in exchange for that, he got caught up in another man's madness. And here he sits. know when you consider all that you have seen and heard in this case, you will return with the only correct and the only just verdict in this case. And you will acquit Jimmy Rodgers